The title of this session is, Can You Talk About Anything with Anyone, Anytime? 8 Principles for Holding Real Conversations. I'm John Stoker, the founder of DialogueWORKS and also the author of Overcoming Fake Talk. In this session, what we'll do is review the 8 principles that are found in my book, and I'll teach you one skill for each principle that should help you to hold real conversations and improve how you talk and relate to others almost immediately. Let's begin by talking about what is fake talk. Fake talk is intentionally using untruths, or it may be unintentionally being vague or unclear, or going along to just kind of be agreeable. And sometimes it's focusing more on what's politically correct than actually telling the truth about certain things. In short, we could just say that fake talk is any conversation that does not achieve the desired results. So why is fake talk detrimental? Or maybe we should ask, why is real talk important? There was a study done by a group of 2 individuals. It's called the Kaplan-Norton study that was conducted out of Harvard in 1997. And what these 2 gentlemen did was ask in their survey work and via interview, how many people or employees knew how their work supported the organization's strategy. So they were just kind of querying, do you really know how what you do contributes to the organization's overall goal or objectives? They were shocked to find out that 95% of the people that they surveyed and interviewed did not know how what they did contributed to the organization's success. Why is that? They found out that it dealt with leadership communication. Think of it, right? Let's say a manager doesn't exactly know what was clearly communicated by the director, so he's not gonna, or she's not gonna ask. They don't want to look stupid. And the director, maybe they've received direction from the vice president, but they don't want to push back or ask for clarity, and so they don't ask either. They just do what they're told, which means the manager has to do what he or she was told, and we kind of go from there. So no one wants to push back or ask questions to clarify or to understand, so people just kind of do what they think they're being asked to do. The study was recently repeated by another consulting group, and they still found that 70% of the people that they surveyed and interviewed didn't understand what it is that they did and how it related or contributed to the organization's strategy and effectiveness. Considering that, it's absolutely essential to understand how we communicate and to do it in a way that's effective and useful. So what are the results of fake talk? Well, you could say a loss of productivity. Particularly if people have to repeat or do over what they've been asked to do several times. Sometimes people just aren't accountable, and that's because people are unwilling to hold the poor performer accountable. Our own research has indicated that about 80% of people in organizations avoid conflict like the plague. So if people don't have the ability to resolve conflict, then competing values continue to exist and people kind of avoid each other and avoid talking about what matters most. Work inefficiency and redundancy obviously impacts productivity, and when that happens, obviously you'll know you've engaged in fake talk. But the problem is that you only find out after the person has absolutely performed in the first place. And finally, we know that 58% of people in most organizations are not engaged. So a lack of personal engagement or the inability of people to collaborate in teams or work with cross-functional teams are all the results that usually occur because people don't know how to talk about what matters most. Let's begin our conversation by talking a little bit about what we call the effectiveness model. When I wrote my book, Overcoming Fake Talk, my publisher actually said, John, I noticed that you start off the book by talking about improving results. Are there other R's? I thought that was an interesting question. And I said, well, certainly there is. Probably 2 would be respect and relationship. And she asked me, what do you mean by that? I said, let's say, for example, that I'm very disrespectful to a person. Does that impact the quality of my relationship with that person? Certainly it does. And does it impact the quality of the results that we create together? Obviously it does also. Or I could say, let's say we don't have a very good relationship. We avoid each other like the plague. Does that impact our respect, the respect we have towards one another, or the results that we create? Obviously so. In reality, you cannot talk about improving results without also considering the quality of the respect and the relationship that you have. Now you'll notice on this little slide that conversation is in the interior of results, respect, and relationship. That's because we believe that results that you get or don't get is the conversation, or the current respect that you're experiencing is the conversation, and likewise the quality of the relationship that you're currently in is the conversation. What was interesting was that I looked up the word conversation in the Oxford English Dictionary years ago, and was surprised that the first definition of conversation was the act of living, associating, and dealing with others. That kind of surprised me. Then I looked at the second definition, and it was behavior or conduct toward another person. It wasn't until I got to the third definition that it actually said the written or oral exchange of ideas, thoughts, feelings, and opinions. And I thought, how interesting that conversation not only includes everything that we say, but also everything that we do with regard to another person. And of course, you are at the center of every conversation that you hold. The purpose of talking about holding real conversations is really to increase your effectiveness and to increase your overall capacity to achieve results, to improve respect, and to build the relationships that you want to build. Understanding that, let's get started. In my book, I talk about 8 principles, but in the training, I want to make it easy to remember. And so there are 4 principles that determine effectiveness. Then I'll talk about the 4 skills, but the principles are awareness. That's about choosing to be conscious. Knowledge is about knowing something so that you can do it. It's really about the skills and the process. Preparation principle is about prepare or beware. Most of us really don't prepare, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. And finally, reflection deals with the way that we do behave towards another person. So we'll want to talk about reflecting our reflections to help us to be more effective in the conversations that we hold. The 4 skills are what we call the REAL skills. REAL is an acronym for recognize and suspend, to uncover, express, ask, listen, and attend. The principles deal with perception, expression, discovery, and connection. So when we get to that part, we'll be taking each of these individual skills and teaching you one thing that will help you to use those skills more effectively. That's where we're going, so let's get after it. The awareness principle. What's awareness all about? Awareness is about recognizing the dynamics that are present in every conversation. It requires us to give our deliberate attention to not only what we're hearing, but what we're seeing that's happening between us and the other person in the conversation. In this regard, we need to choose to be conscious, to be objective, not only about what we're hearing in terms of content, but also what we're seeing and experiencing as we talk with another person. Understanding this awareness principle, we developed a simple methodology for recognizing in the moment where the conversation is or where it's headed. You'll notice in the middle of this graphic there's a line, and on the line it says choice. The line represents the fact that we have a choice in every conversation that we hold, either to go above the line or below the line. We have found that when we go below the line, we can lift the conversation above the line, but the deeper we get below the line, the harder it is to get above the line. So let's talk about below the line for a moment. Conversations which are below the line are usually about a person defending themselves. These kind of conversations are usually quite reactionary, where a person is reacting to either something you said or did. They're often very disrespectful. And a number of behaviors that people might engage in would be denial, deferral, criticism, justification, or blame. So I might say to someone, hey, you said you'd get that for me. I did not. right? Or I might say, what do you think? Oh, whatever you want. There's the deferral. Or criticism. Well, if you'd have gotten to me, what I really wanted on time, maybe I could have given it to you. Notice that's not only blaming me, but it's also a criticism. Those are the type of behaviors that people engage in below the line. There are either kind of fight behaviors or flight behaviors, but in any case, these behaviors lead to what I would refer to as dissolution. In other words, they lead to kind of a breaking apart or a disintegration, so that I may have to actually come back and rebuild respect in the relationship before continuing the conversation. On the other hand, conversations which are above the line are characterized more by discovery rather than defense. And the reason we chose the word act is because it signals to us that a person is going to deliberately engage in certain behaviors that'll help the conversation be more effective. Notice the behaviors that I've listed that are more respectful. Above the line, we ask questions. We listen to one another. We share our views, even though they may be opposing views. And we learn from what it is that we're hearing. And we may change. Actually, the research says that a new idea changes the electronic configuration of your brain. So there's things that are changing, even though we may not be aware of them. These conversations are about resolution, which basically means we could agree to disagree, but we still understand each other and learn from one another. So at any point in time, you could be observing a conversation and simply ask yourself, whoa, is this conversation going below the line or above the line? And you know what that looks like. So the real question then becomes, when the conversation is going below the line, what can we do to lift the conversation? Simple. We ask questions when people go below the line to lift the conversation above the line. So for example, let's say you see someone fold their arms, they look away, or they roll their eyes, or they become emotional, right? As you're sharing an idea. They may become defensive. All you gotta really do is say, I'm wondering if you have some concerns about my idea. Or tell me what it is you're thinking right now about my idea. When that happens, what you're doing is forcing a person basically to think about what it is that they're thinking and share it with you. So the cue here is to recognize their behavior and then ask for meaning about that behavior. That's the skill we'd use. Recognize whether conversation is going below the line or it's above the line. And if it goes below the line, ask questions to lift the conversation above the line. Let's now talk for a moment about the knowledge principle. Knowledge focuses on our ability to choose a response. What we know does us really no good unless we do something. Now, the reason I put the picture in there, the river picture, those of you who know me know that I was a whitewater guide while I was going to college for 13 years. It's how I paid for my education. And when I first started running the river, I had to memorize literally 288 miles of what was happening in the river, the rapids, the rock formation, the campgrounds, before I could get my own boat. I took notes. I bought maps. I drew pictures of rivers. This is one of the most dramatic rivers, rapids that you can see. And the reason I put it in here was just to remind me that I'd studied it, I'd drawn pictures of it, I was told how to run it, but I got in there and I couldn't read the water. I didn't know what was happening where. I dinged a prop and busted part of the motor. I was lucky I didn't tear the boat, which really told me that I didn't know what I knew until I did something. So you'll notice that third bullet there, right? We don't often know what we know until we do something. And then it becomes quite apparent what it is that we don't know, right? So to know what you know, bottom line, the knowledge cycle, which I love, is we must do something. We know something, then we attempt it. And based on what we get in terms of results, we find out how quickly we really know what we think we know or we don't. That's why I like this last bullet. When you don't get the results that you want, particularly in conversation, either you are not doing what you know, or what you know really tells you you don't know what you're doing. With that in mind, we want to talk quickly about the 4 skills. So let me introduce the real conversation model. And remember I said that the REAL forms an acronym: recognize and suspend, express, ask, listen, and attend. So let's take the easy ones first, and then we'll go to the hard ones. Express is doing nothing more than sharing your ideas, opinions, experience, or feelings. I'm expressing right now. Asking is about asking questions and seeking understanding. You knew those as soon as I put up the model. But recognize and suspend is a little different. And I typically say recognize and suspend what? Well, it's your thinking. If we made it obvious, it would be you have an ability to either notice your thinking and assumptions and then set them aside. Simply put, it's about being open. And listening and attending, why do you think I divided those? I divided them because I think listening is what we do with our ears, but attending is what we do with the rest of us, with our eyes, with our feelings, with our heart, with our thoughts. And so I divided them. So these are the skills, if you will, for holding any difficult conversation. We engage in these whether you recognize it or not all the time. As we put the skills together, we created what we call the Real Conversation Framework. For example, if you look at the graphic there to the right, as I'm open, I recognize and suspend and express, I create a field of initiation. Initiation is doing nothing more than beginning. When we hold a tough or difficult conversation, what we want to do in initiation is to focus the attention of our listener and then share data or facts and interpretation. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Recognizing and suspending, being open and asking, creates what we call a field of discovery. In discovery, all we do is ask questions, but we do them for two purposes. One, to confirm our thinking, and second, to learn something. As I ask and I listen and attend, I create a field of connection. Connection for us summarizes not only what we've heard, if I make it simple, but also the values, what's important to other people, and our expectations, and we have a chance to clarify consequences. Finally, in building, as we listen and attend, and then we express our views, we create a field of what we'd call building or construction, where we build new perspectives, new understanding, new ideas, and come up with solutions for work. Right? So in building, what we're doing is really creating accountability by agreeing on a plan and gaining commitment. So this is the process that we use for holding any difficult conversation: initiate, discover, connect, and build. Some of the advantages to this process is you always will know where to start. You'll know where you are at any point in time during a conversation, and you'll know when you're done. If I was to put them into the model, they would look like this. In initiate, we describe the situation. We begin by focusing attention, sharing facts, and then sharing interpretations. In discovery, we want to gain understanding. We ask questions to either confirm our thinking or to learn. In connection, we are trying to clarify what we've understood by summarizing and clarifying values, sharing expectations and consequences. Finally, in building, that's where we're really going to establish accountability. This is where we want something to change. That's why we're holding the conversation to begin with. So we want to create a plan and gain commitment to that plan. Those are the skills and steps for holding any conversation. We want to use the real skills: recognize and suspend, express, ask, listen, and attend. And we want to use the process for holding that conversation by initiating, discovering, connecting, and building. Let's move to the third principle, the preparation principle. Preparation allows you to talk about difficult topics with confidence. You want to do this so you're prepared and you're not forced to shoot from the hip. You just hope it turns out well. Problem is that we don't know what we want sometimes, or how we're going to achieve our objectives. We're sure to fall short. So what we want to do is prepare. A friend of mine conducted a survey on difficult conversations a couple years back. He surveyed about 10,000 people in 38 different industries. And one of the questions he asked in that survey was, how many people actually prepare to hold a potentially difficult conversation? He was surprised to find out that less than 5% of people actually ever prepare. No wonder things don't go well. So why prepare? Very simply, there are 3 parts of our brain that we need to understand that are basically improved by preparing. The first part is what we would call the unconscious, or it's reactive protective. For example, if you approached a friend and took a swipe at their eyes and they blinked and pulled their head back, that's the unconscious part of their brain that you're seeing being manifest. They're reacting and they're protecting themselves. Inside the reactive protective mechanism of the brain is our subconscious. This part of our brain is what we would refer to as protective illogical. It's still trying to protect us, but it's illogical. For example, let's say during college, all of college, I only dated blondes. And I never really had a deep and abiding relationship with anybody that I dated. So you can imagine what my brain's doing, right? Your ability to interact with blondes does not go well. So now let's say I'm in my first job in corporate America, and there's a blonde woman on my team. We're pretty good friends, and I start to think to myself, wow, I wondered if she'd be interested in going to dinner with me, to going on a date. What's my brain gonna do? Don't go there. You know this won't work well. It never does. And then I even start to feel a little bit of angst. That's my subconscious trying to protect me, but being illogical at the same time. So how did I get out of that situation? I went to the conscious part of my brain, which is logical and rational. So I do that by asking questions. Wait a minute. Have I had any negative interactions with this person? No. Has she ever expressed any kind of interest in me? Several times, saying, why don't we get together? Is there a chance that perhaps I could have a more meaningful relationship with this person? Well, there's nothing that tells me that it's not possible. That's the logical, rational part of my brain. So what happens when we prepare? When we prepare a conversation, we're using the conscious part of our brain, the logical, rational part, to think through what it is we know about the person, the topic of the conversation, how they might react, what it is that we want from that conversation, which ensures the likelihood that we'll be more successful. If we don't stop and think and prepare a little bit, we're ensuring that the subconscious and unconscious parts of our brain will probably run the conversation. That's often why they don't go well. The subconscious and unconscious ensures that we'll go to fight or flight and probably fail. When we take the time to prepare, what we're doing is increasing the likelihood that we'll create a new reality or a different conversation that we want to hold. So how might we do that? One of the skills for increasing your preparation is to identify your intent. To identify your intent, all you got to do is ask yourself, well, what do I want, or what is the purpose for holding this conversation? You know, years ago when I actually created this, I was using it on myself. I always kind of apply stuff that we're creating for at least a year. And I was thinking about a conversation that I needed to hold with my young son who was in high school. He'd gotten an F the first quarter in Chinese. And when I wrote out my own purpose, I literally wrote, I want to guilt this boy to such an extent he will never, ever not do his Chinese homework again. As I wrote it down, I looked at it and I started laughing because I thought, you know what, this conversation is doomed from the get-go. So I really had to stop and say to myself, what do I want to come out of this conversation? And I realized that after much thought that the purpose of the conversation ought to be something like, you know, I want him to take responsibility for his own learning and take the initiative to do his homework so I don't have to nag him. Boy, that really impacted the conversation that I needed to hold. I had to do some serious thinking about how I would approach him, what I should share in terms of information, and then the types of questions that I would ask to try to get us to him learning that and taking responsibility for it. So why is it important to identify your intent? You know, if you don't identify your intent, you don't know what it is you're going to achieve. You probably won't achieve what it is you thought you'd want to achieve. Or if I just give you the bullet at the bottom there, if you don't know what you want, it doesn't really matter because you're going to get whatever it is you didn't want. And that's why you clarify your intent before holding these types of conversations. Now, why is that important? If you take what you want, you can combine it with what we call an attention check. The purpose of an attention check is basically to garner the attention of the person you're going to speak with. Let me illustrate with an example. Let's say on a Friday afternoon, I need something from you, and I call you at 4:53, and you're not there, and I leave this message on your phone. Dang, you're not there. This was so important. I wish like anything, I need to talk. Oh, well, I'll try later. Let's say you picked up the phone and you heard that. It wasn't 5 quite yet, but you heard it. What are you going to do? You're probably going to pick up the phone and call me, but now I'm not there. Now what are you going to do? Maybe you stay 5-10 minutes after work. You call me again and I'm still not there. So maybe what are you going to do now? You're going to walk down to my office and see if I'm there. My computer's on, I haven't left, but I'm not there. So what are you going to do? All weekend long, you may think about what it is that I wanted. Or you may actually, if you knew my cell phone, personal cell phone, you may call me and say, John, what is it that you wanted? That's the pull that an attention check has. And they're very easy. You just basically say something like, I'd like to talk about, and then whatever it is you'd like to talk about. Right? So with my son, I might have said, Bryson, I'd like to talk about what I could do to help you improve in Chinese. Can we talk about that? So notice what I did. I shared my intention, and then I asked for permission to engage. Now, in the example that I used there, I'd like to talk about representing the company well. Let's say I wanted to talk about how a presentation went earlier that day. Well, that's pretty neutral, right? I'd like to talk about representing the company well. Can we talk about that? So the important thing here is that when you share an attention check with somebody, it should always be neutral or positive. So what I wrote up above, representing the company well, is neutral. If I wanted to spin it positive, it might sound like this. I'd really like to talk about how you could make a real impact on people that listen to you. Could we talk for a moment? Obviously, you could see how that's going to garner someone's attention and make them curious. And sure, they'll say, yeah. That's what an attention check does. It garners the person's attention. That's one of the things that we want to prepare in holding a tough conversation. Now, I do have to say, before I leave this section, you got to watch your tone. 38% of the content of a message is supposedly about tone. So even if you had words that were very respectful, if your tone is negative or accusatory or defensive, that's what the person is going to see and experience. Why see? Because the tone of a message aligns itself with the nonverbal behavior that people display. That's why we say that respect is communicated in both word and in tone. So you want to make sure that your tone is neutral or positive as you share an attention check. Let's talk about the reflection principle. People are constantly reflecting mental, vocal, visual, and verbal messages to us. When we combine these elements in a message, they kind of compose what we would refer to as an interaction style. It's the style with which a person prefers to communicate. What's interesting about interaction style is that my style may be different than your style. And when it is, we often run the risk of offending others without intending to. This happens quite frequently. So what are the 4 styles? Before I go through them, let me just say this. People are always reflecting their style to you. And here's the interesting part, people will reflect your style back to you. Well, what do I mean by that? Let's say you saw somebody who was having a bad day or appeared to be kind of grumpy in the grocery store. Have you ever smiled at a person like that? Typically, they may do what? They'll smile back. That's that principle, that if you do a certain thing to them, they'll often do it back to you. Or what you reflect to them, they'll reflect back to you. That's important to understand as we kind of look at these styles. So let me go through each of them very quickly, and then we'll give you some tips for basically noticing what these styles are. Initiators want to get to it. These are the go-getter types. These are people that want it done yesterday. Very much focused on action results. Only about 12% of the population are initiators. Builders, on the other hand, love recognition and appreciation. These are people who are highly motivating to others, but they like to kind of be the center of attention. About 19% of the population are builders. Connectors love cooperation. They love peace and harmony, and they love to work together in groups or teams. These people are often quite quiet. 39% of the population are connectors. Finally, discoverers are the people who want to get it right. These are your analytical types, who are highly analytical in terms of looking at data, processes, and planning. These are about 30% of the population. So we have 4 distinct styles: initiator, builder, connector, and discoverer. Here's a summary of each style. You'll notice at the top of the slide it says we want to notice clusters. The reason that we want to do that, particularly if you want to be a body language expert, which everybody seems to say they do, is that one thing does not a certain style make. We look for a number of behaviors that indicate to us what this person may be in their interaction style. So notice the initiator, the mental perspective is that they want action. What do they do with their hands or their body? Right? They point or chop. That's why I put that picture in there. The tone of their voice is often blunt or forceful, or they're often accused of being very direct and cold. Proximity-wise, there is no space limitation. They'll get right up in your face, nose to nose, or they may even tap on your chest with their finger. What kind of words do they use? Words like results, action, let's get to it. So notice as I went through that, I'm giving you a mental perspective, some things they'll do visually, some things they'll do vocally, and even some things they'll do verbally by way of words. Let's take the builder. Remember, builders want recognition and appreciation, right? They're very expressive with their nonverbals. They'll move their hands around. They'll draw things in the air in front of them. Their voice is often very animated, high inflection, a variation in tone. Proximity-wise, they often touch you when talking. They may touch you on the forearm, the elbow, or even on the back of your back. They use words that are highly metaphorical or make an analogy. So they might say something like a sweet, or how are you feeling today? Oh, I'm feeling like there's an elephant sitting on my chest. Right? That's a pretty good indication you're talking to a builder. Connector. Connector, remember, these folks love teams, groups, they love relationships with people, right? Their vocal qualities are often quite quiet. They'll use minimal gestures of any type. Proximity, they got to have 2 arms length unless they know you. They don't like you to be very close to them. And they use words like team or group or support as they're talking to you. Discoverers, these are your analytical types. They love precision, analysis, planning, processes, right? In terms of their nonverbals, they're very rigid. They'll talk with a monotone, meaning that they just, kind of speak at one tone. They like space also, but not as much as the connector, so 1 arm's length is good for them. And they'll use words like data or process or who analyzed this or when are you hoping to have this done and who's doing what. That's the kind of wording that a discoverer uses. So again, when we talk about clusters, right, we're looking for clusters of behaviors as we try to determine who is what. And once you see what they're doing, what you want to do is reflect what they're reflecting to you. This helps you to create a personal connection with them. Actually, what's going on in their brain is telling them, you know what? They're just like us. Go ahead, be open, talk. They'll get you, they'll understand you. Whereas if you're not, or you're taking a different style than them, their brain may say, look out, they're not like us, you need to get defensive. That's what's literally going on. So here's the skill: match, don't mimic. Matching is doing nothing more than kind of mirroring what they're doing. So you want to adapt to their proximity, which means if you took a step forward, if you were standing and they move or lean backward, step back. Watch what they're doing with their eyes. If they look at you continually, look at them. If they look away when talking, then look away. Watch what it is they're doing with their gestures. If they're gesturing with their hands, then gesture with your hands. You can match their tempo, how fast they're moving, and the tone of their voice. If they do anything that you don't understand, like if I got an eye roll, you may want to summarize and then check for clarity by asking questions to understand what's going on. So you could even say, I noticed you rolled your eyes. Is there something you don't agree with? But it's important that you get that I'm not asking you to parrot or mimic their behavior. You're just gently matching what it is that they're doing. That will help to form a personal connection. Let's now begin to talk about the 4 skills. And before we do that, I want to talk about what we call the process of perception. This quick diagram is intended to help us understand how we think. So you'll notice the box on the left, we call the data pool, and this person is observing, I guess, what you'd call a tree, although some people have said, hey, it looks like broccoli to me. That's not broccoli to me. So they look or make observations at this event through the lens of what we call their mental models. If you were a Covey fan, he would call this your paradigm. If you were a Hiram Smith fan, he'd call this your belief window. But we all have, figuratively, kind of a lens through which we view the world. This person, as they make observation, engages in the process of selection. And what do they see? Kind of a group of leaves. Now here's what's interesting. We take this selected data and we process it through our mental models again, and here's where we add stuff we like and subtract stuff we don't know or understand. And then, like pieces of a puzzle, we assemble this selected data where we think the piece fits and make some interpretation about what they all mean. You'll notice there are some black spots in the assembly of these pieces of data. The black spots are intended to portray gaps or blanks in our thinking, which really signal that the pieces of the puzzle around the blank don't fit, but we ignore the gaps and make them fit anyway. Often in a live training, I'll use this example. I'll say, I'm going to tell you all the places I've lived. Tell me the first word that comes to mind when I tell you where I've lived. And so I might go, California, and they'll go surfer. Or Utah, they'll say Mormon. Or Texas, they'll say cowboy. And I just point out, look, not everybody that lives in Texas is a cowboy. But all I got to do is say Texas, and your head fills in the blank. What's interesting is the way we interpret oftentimes causes us to become emotional. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You'll notice the cloud of emotion around this person's head. The reason I put a cloud there is to portray that oftentimes when we're hot or angry or frustrated, those emotions obscure the rationality of our own thinking. And sometimes those emotions are hidden from others. That's why they're in the box. And sometimes they're outside the box. They're readily apparent in terms of the person that we're talking to. In any case, if our interpretations are based on an emotional response, then we usually react. That's why I put the above the line, below the line analogy at the bottom of the chart, which you have action, reaction. And those actions or reactions create results, which then go back into the data pool. So in terms of the perception principle, if we're making it really easy, you can see that we observe and select certain things. We're not seeing all of them, but we see and hear things, and those things that we see and hear cause us to think something. That all takes place internally. What our feelings are and what we say and what we do are all apparent to the other person, and they're driven by our thinking. But in terms of our perception, what we really need to understand is that what we selectively see, hear, and think is incomplete or inaccurate. It's based on that lens of our mental models. So how do we get out of our stinking thinking? It's very easy. What we want to do is assess the accuracy of our thinking by determining what is data and what is interpretation. So what are data? Data are the facts or information that's verifiable. What is interpretation? Interpretation is the meaning that we assign the facts. Unfortunately, we usually see our thinking as fact because we thought it, and that's the problem. But when we engage in potentially difficult conversation or hold a real conversation, what we really want to do is share our data and what that data has led us to think. To teach you that, we need to introduce the expression principle. The expression principle deals with how we share our ideas, opinions, thoughts, and feelings, and the fact that it's really an extension of ourselves. The words we use, our tone, word inflection, emotional energy that we bring to a conversation, the tempo and the pauses reflect what's going on in our head. The challenge is to express ourselves in a way that creates engagement rather than defensiveness. Okay, so how do we do that? We want to use what we call I statements. I statements rather than you statements when sharing data and interpretation. Why do we want to do that? Well, I statements establish ownership. I noticed, right? I'm thinking, right? I statements often soften the you, right? And you statements usually are equated to blame or accusation. So notice the difference in the example. You did this incorrectly versus I wonder if you did this incorrectly. Do you see how the I statement, I wonder, softens the you? That's what we want to do as we're sharing what it is that we're experiencing in terms of data and what it's causing us to think. So here's the language of data. If we look at the I statements, I noticed, I saw, I heard, I feel. And here's the language of interpretation. I wonder, I'm guessing, I'm assuming, I believe, I think, I know. So here's how it would sound in the initiation part of the conversation. I noticed that you didn't say anything during the meeting, which was for over 2 hours. I'm wondering if there was something going on that you really didn't agree with. You can see how that would almost take me to asking a question, which is where we're going. But I want you to notice how it would sound in terms of the I statements. You want to use language that people can hear. So let's get to discovery, because obviously if we've shared data and interpretation, discovery principle would be next. Asking questions is the easiest way to create respect. Why? Because it implies that you really want to know and that you'll listen to what the person has to say. So what's important for you to realize is if you are going to ask questions, you better listen. If you don't want to know, then don't ask. Years ago, where we taught real conversation skills at a company, we came back 6 months after we'd finished, and I walked around out on the company floor asking people how things were going. And here's what I heard from one person. Well, today my boss asked me a question, and as I was answering, he basically said when I finished, next time I'll ask an expert. Another person I asked said, well, my boss asked me what I thought, and as I was telling her, she walked off and left me talking to myself. These people had gotten how important it was to ask questions to create respect, but they really didn't want to know the answer. So they did more to create disrespect than they did respect. If you authentically try to understand what the other person is sharing, it will create respect. And asking questions changes hearts and minds because the asking of questions goes into the person's mind and heart at a deeper level. Knowing that, there are 5 types of questions we could ask, and I put them in this continuum, which we call the emotional security spectrum, which helps you to understand which questions to use in which order. Now, let me just say one thing. Notice that reflect is at the top. The reason it's there is because when emotion is high, that's what we want to do. We want to make a reflecting statement. I can see you're upset. When a person hears that, their brain says, hey, they get us, they're on our side. And the effect of that is to reduce the emotion. After you've reflected, you can request, guess, question or ask, and then summarize. You can use these in different order if you want. So the only important thing to see on this slide is that reflection is first. If you reflected and the person's emotion does not subside, you just have to know that they are a little too far gone to probably respond. What do I mean by that? Their brain has basically given them an adrenaline dump, and they're more interested in protecting themselves, fighting or flighting, than they are in answering questions. In that case, you may have to postpone the conversation. But the questions you ask do demonstrate the depth of understanding you seek. So if I was to throw these questions up here one at a time and just explain them briefly, here's what they'd be. Notice that a reflecting statement is nothing more than an acknowledgement of what you're seeing in terms of emotion, the words they're using, or their action. And the reason I put that distinction in there is that not everybody gets emotional, right? Let's say I could say to somebody, well, I noticed you came in my office and you sat down after shutting the door and you didn't say a thing. Obviously, I want to ask them another question after that. Notice reflecting statement really isn't actually a question. It is a reflection or an acknowledgement or an affirmation of the emotions, words, and actions that you're experiencing from them. A request is about demonstrating interest. Tell me what's going on. Or can you tell me what's going on? I'm expressing my interest to try to get them talking. A guessing question is a question that basically is asking them to commit to an idea that you're sharing. So I could say, look at the reflect. I noticed you haven't said anything to me in 2 days. I'm guessing I've offended you. Notice all they have to do to that question is just say yes or no. That's why I said it's a question that's getting them to commit to an idea or conclusion or an opinion that you're offering them vis-a-vis a question. Questioning is about gaining information. This in the literature on conversation is often referred to as probing. I don't like that term because when I'm done probing a frog, what do I have? A dead frog. So I like to refer to these types of questions. It's just questions to know. I'm asking questions to learn something. What led to that conclusion? What was so important about that to you? Why was it important that you finish this on time? How do you intend to do that? So the question to know questions are about garnering information. They're about asking the journalistic questions of who, where, why, what, how much. And finally, we put in summary, because summarizing is an excellent way to gain clarification. And you can summarize, quite frankly, anytime you want. So, what you'd like me to do is, and you fill in the blank. And, sometimes when you summarize, you find out very quickly that what you thought you understood isn't at all what they intended. So summarizing is a great way to gain clarification about what it is you think you've understood. All right, let's talk about the connection skill. We create connection as we listen and attend to one another, right? Understanding that there are certain things to do that will help you improve your connection. Not only listening with your ears, but attending with the rest of us, right? So we're about out of time, but let me just say that this is a wonderful connection skill. Let me teach it to you very quickly. What you want to do when you listen to a person is listen for the words and the tone that a person uses in a conversation. And when I try and do this, I often try to visualize the person with 5 little talk boxes around them. And as I'm listening to them, I fill in the talk boxes with a particular word or even a mention of tone. So let me say I was talking to you and frustrated, there's a tone box, right? And then I might listen to you and you might say something like, well, something I just got to get over, right? So when I hear that I'd probably put that in a talk box with a comma, get over, and I'm thinking already, get over what? Okay, so I get you talking, and then I start to ask questions about things, words, and tone that you've used that I've noticed and heard. Let me give you an example. Years ago, I realized, here's the principle, and it's not on the slide, so I jot it down. People only know what they know. What do I mean by that? People are telling you when they're talking to you what they know, and they're telling you about themselves. So to try to practice that, I used to stand in lines at grocery stores and say to people, hey, how's it going today? Well, you know, now, like I'm supposed to know something. So I might say something like, well, whatever it is I'm supposed to know, I'm guessing that today was frustrating. Yeah, no kidding, right? So notice how I used that tone to guess at what I thought it meant. Anyway, we'd continue, and I'd usually like to ask them, I said, can I ask you a strange question? They go, sure. I'd say to them something like this, what is it you absolutely hate about your house? Oh, my kids are such messes. That place is a dump. Nothing. I can never find what I want when I want it. And then I would take that and ask this question. You know, I'm guessing from what you just said, you're really frustrated at work when people are unorganized and don't give you what you want when you want it. People's eyes get real big and they go, how did you know that? Are you a mind reader or something? Well, I'm not really a mind reader, but notice I asked them a question about their house, and they're telling me about them. They're telling me what I know. And I just took that and turned it into a question to validate for myself if my thinking about them was accurate. It's a wonderful skill to learn about what's going on with a person that they're exposing to you, but you don't often realize what it is that they're doing. So notice, you want to listen and attend to what is being said and even what's not being said. That's all the nonverbals. And just ask questions to try to understand it. So there's a skill for each of the 8 principles that are mentioned in the book. What's next? Let me just say that you got to be patient with yourself. Right? Rome wasn't built in a day, you know that, and you want to be persistent. You just want to keep working it, keep trying. It helps immensely to be prepared. You need to be proactive. What do I mean by that? You need to make a deliberate attempt to practice a specific skill at a certain time with a certain person in a certain situation. And like I said, you want to be in practice. The more you practice, right, what was intentional will become unintentional. In other words, you'll basically move from the conscious level to the subconscious level in using the skills. But practicing is the name of the game. I'd invite you, by the way, to buy my book, Overcoming Fake Talk, which is available in bookstores. There are a number of free gifts that you can get if you'll buy them from a website that I'll show you in just a moment. A free productivity article, the lost chapter in the book that the publisher made me take out, a real conversation self-assessment is also available, and a self-directed learning guide, which is a little workbook that you can use to kind of work on and write out or craft your real conversations. So here's the site. If you'll buy Overcoming Fake Talk at this site, it should be www.overcomingfaketalkbook.com. If you click on the button to buy the book, it'll give you an option of going to any number of bookstores. Then what you want to do to get the free gifts is to come back to the same website and look for the button that says Claim Gifts. If you'll click on the button and then follow the directions on the page that'll come up next, you will get an email that will come to you with links to all the free gifts that I've just mentioned. I hope you'll take the opportunity to do that. I've hoped you've learned something today that would help you to talk about anything with anyone, anytime. There are a number of principles, 8 to be exact, that will help you to do that. I'd invite you to apply what it is that you've learned and to practice it, and I'll guarantee you that if you will, your conversations will improve drastically as you learn to talk about what matters most to get the things that you really want. Best of luck.